To Temple Israel. I see many members of our congregation who are here on a regular basis and some guests who are new. I'm Rabbi Michael Friedman, so pleased to have all of you with us. And so pleased to have with us this evening Richard Behar. He's an acclaimed business reporter who has garnered more than 20 major journalism awards over his lengthy career. Since 2012, he's been the contributing editor of investigations for Forbes. And for many years, he wrote on the staff of Forbes and Time and Fortune and has been featured on nearly every news platform and network that you've heard of. We are grateful to Michelle and Kenny Gersh for introducing us to Richard and for helping us bring him here to Temple Israel this evening. His latest, yes, thank you. A little round of applause, yeah. His latest book is Madoff, The Final Word. And so I'll just say a couple of additional beyond final words before you start, and then I'll explain the, well, let me first, I'm going to say this. I'm going to explain this format of the evening, then I'll say just a couple of words about the book. So after my brief introduction, Richard's going to walk us through a presentation about a half hour. Then he and I are going to sit down, because I just have a few, I'll say, like specifically Jewish questions for him. And then we'll open it up to all of you. And we'll ask that when you ask a question, that we just make sure you use the microphone, not just so that folks in the room can hear, but we have quite a few people on the live stream as well. Hi to all of you at home or wherever you may be. So we want to make sure that you use the microphone so that they can hear your question as well as Richard's answer. So if you're like me, you're sitting here and you're saying, I already know a lot about this situation, right? For years, we've been reading about Madoff. Some of us have watched the Netflix documentary or the dramatized film or, scripted, what do you call it? Not dramatized, scripted film. We've read other accounts and articles, and other books have been written as well. And I'm like you. And then I read this book. This book, I believe, is a super important contribution to the existing literature and media out there about Madoff. In part, I mean, not only the facts and narratives that Richard shares, but the way you've written the book is really important. Because Richard leads us as an investigative journalist ourselves. I felt like an investigative journalist myself, being led by the hand through your process of discovery. And rather than telling us the answers in the book, each chapter is framed around a question. That then throughout the course of the chapter is slowly the answers, multiple sometimes, answers to the question are slowly revealed bit by bit throughout the chapter. So to me, this was like a fun, like how can a book about Bernie Madoff be fun? To me, this was actually a fun read. I enjoyed it. My wife was like, "You're still like, really? Like this, like the, yeah." And I was like, "Yeah, it's actually really interesting." So I encourage that even if you think you know everything about Bernie Madoff, this book is still important, or even more important. So thank you. Richard, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Michael, and thank you for those very kind words, and thank you, everybody. It's great being here. Does this sound okay? All right, let's just cut right to it, why I'm really here. I have an amazing investment opportunity for you all. You do. Yes. You can get 10 to 20% per year. I've never had a losing year. Don't contact me, because, if you ask too many details, it's my recipe. Don't ask too much or you're out. I'll throw you out. If you work in Wall Street, you can't come in. I don't want you. There are people handling your account for me, but no email. You can't email them. Sorry. You want to look up your account online? You can't do it. I like old-fashioned statements that look really folksy, and that's what you'll be getting. Oh, and I can't take you all. I don't have room for everybody. So I just take, some of you, and the others, when there's room, I'll take you in. Who's in? That's Madoff. That's what he did. I spent 15 years doing this book, not always full time, and a quarter of my life. So I'm clearly a glutton for punishment. Arthur Levitt lives in Westport, the former chairman of the SEC, and I once said to Arthur, apparently Bernie and I are in prison for life, but one of us at least got out alive. A top prosecutor in the Madoff cases told me you could probe this for 50 years and not go down every angle and turn up every truth. And, you know, of course, but I needed to get to the big truths. And that's why I committed so much time to it. First of all, why not? This is the greatest, biggest, lengthiest financial fraud in history. Known fraud. You know, who knows what's out there? We can only go with what we're known. It's bigger than Enron. $68 billion fraud, worth $100 billion in today's money, more or less. A dozen books came out before 2013. With all due respect, it was to the other authors, it was way too soon. Even the Madoff 5 trial had only started in 2013, and that was the only trial of employees criminally, and they were all convicted. It was also the lengthiest, believed to be the lengthiest white-collar criminal case in the history of the Southern District of New York. And I attended half of it, and it was well worth it because over those years, you develop sources and you develop a lot of trust, and there's so much that, you know, just flowed out from there. I'm assuming everyone knows what a Ponzi is, right? Pay off, take from Peter to pay off Paul, or in this case, Moshe to pay off Abe. It's been going on for thousands of years. And traditionally, they start as an affinity fraud, traditionally. And this one, as we know, started in the Jewish community and then spread around the world like a financial tsunami. Bernie did it with fake trades of stock and backdated statements, trading statements with his consistent returns. Never a losing year, like I said. And I'm going to play a little short trailer from the Netflix thing, just a 2-minute trailer, just because it kind of visually captures the magnificence of it. They got some things wrong. We'll get into some of that, but all right, down is up, down is up. Well, it gives you a sense of what was going on. I'll tell you afterwards, Bernie's conversation with me when he asked me if he's a sociopath. Okay, here we go.
People think they know the story. Bernie Madoff has been arrested. They think it's a story about one man. There is no way you can run a $50 billion Ponzi scheme and not have anybody else know about it. Madoff was the scapegoat of the financial crisis. In a blue-collar crime, the bodies dropped before you investigate. In a white-collar crime, they drop afterwards.
Bernie fed on being the guy.
They always wanted to please everybody. They didn't want to kill him who's going to let you go over there.
And the choice he made was he could live with himself as a liar much more easily than he could live with himself as a failure.
He had his handful of soldiers create fake trading documents to give to the SEC.
Look at the numbers. It's impossible that he's trading in the volume that he says he is. If we're getting good returns, people need not to ask too many questions.
We need a smoking gun. The big banks, the regulatory agencies completely fail.
If you want to watch the book, you have totally and thoroughly failed in your mission.
Bernie's managing money for some of the world's most dangerous people.
He told me if I am wrong, I have no out. I am a dead man.
People lost everything.
We're not going to die was in my mid-70s already.
Didn't believe in life savings. It's terrible. Why did every one of them boys, which everybody used to be, stick with you?
Trust, betrayal, pure evil. 100 years from now, people will remember this story.
All right, it was a $68 billion fraud, but what's a billion among friends? The The biggest problem with these shows, the Netflix thing, the HBO thing with Robert De Niro playing Bernie and Michelle Pfeiffer playing Ruth, you had Richard Dreyfuss playing Bernie and Blythe Danner playing Ruth in the ABC series. They all portray the family as innocent victims. It's not true. And I'll show you some examples, and there's more in the book. You know, Bernie told me that the HBO folks assured him that Ruth would be treated well and come out well, so he gave them some cooperation. Ruth, by the way, had Michelle Pfeiffer come to her home in order to see how she lives and to portray her and to play her. Ruth likes fiction, and she wouldn't take tough questions from an investigative reporter, but she liked meeting Michelle. Aside from what I learned about the family, there we go. I was determined to find out when the fraud began, and it went all the way back to the early 60s, if not 1960, when Bernie started the business. So he was always a fraudster, despite him claiming that he just got into a problem, couldn't get out of it, and the whole thing snowballed. He's 22 here, and the Ponzi is already happening. I had a level of access to him that I'm very happy was provided to no other reporters. I had 3 prison visits, 50 phone conversations that I taped. I'll play a few excerpts that are really telling tonight. Hundreds of emails and letters, a lot of it garbage because pathological liar. I mean, it's good color, but in the end. And hundreds of sources, including a lot of feds, prosecutors, and confidential FBI documents that were really helpful. And you'll see a couple up here, like this one. I don't know if you can read it, but I'll read the key part for you. Frank DeFiscali was Bernie's deputy in crime. And he's telling the FBI in 2009 that he went up to Bernie's office and Madoff is looking comatose at his screen. He was under tremendous stress for weeks. Bernie looked at him and said, "I'm at the end of my rope." DeFiscali did not know what he meant. Madoff said, "I don't have any money." DeFiscali could not believe what he was hearing. Madoff went on, quote, "The whole business has been a scam. It goes all the way back to Mo and goes back to Abe. It's Mo Steinberg and Abe Herson who were Bernie's first non-family investors in the early 1960s, which Bernie confirmed as well to me. Now, the other reason I jumped on this story like I did was my dear cousin and Staples High graduate called me and said, "Did you see in the newspaper about this guy Madoff?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "My mom lost everything." I said, "What?" His mom, my Aunt Adele, who was up on Long Lots Road forever, was kind of like a surrogate mom to me because I grew up in foster care, and I thought she was the savviest person financially. And she'd always say, "Can you investigate this? Can you investigate that for me? What is this?" Never once said anything about this guy, Bernie, and never told me how much money she had with him. Or I would have done even cursory probe and easily would have found stuff where I'd come back to her and say, 100%? Are you out of your mind? Look at this, look at that. This isn't right. If you love him, put 10%, 20%. But that was part of the Bernie mystique and the secret. She wouldn't even let me in on it. And she explored it with me in the book with a lot of humor. And her feeling was, do not call me a victim. The government owes me nothing. It was carte blanche all the way. And it is a view that I share. That's from my bar mitzvah, my Aunt Adele and Uncle Al. You know, this is one of her statements, and it's really wonderful when, you know, Bernie always buys low and sells high. Easy to do when it's fake. because it doesn't take a genius to predict the past. Bernie and his parents, Laurelton, Queens, upper middle class Jewish community, idyllic Eisenhower times in the 50s, not idyllic in that house. Ralph's sports business, sports equipment business, went bankrupt. He had an IRS lien on the house, and he also had these two little scrappy brokerage companies he ran out of the house, and he put them in Sylvia's name. Women were not exactly doing this kind of brokerage business in the 50s. He wanted to shield it from the IRS. There was a sweep on Wall Street of unregistered firms, and her firms were caught up in it and shut down. Bernie, this is a precursor of what was to happen, because Bernie himself never registered as an investment advisor until close to the very end. High school, University of Alabama. As a Jewish kid from Queens, wind up at the University of Alabama in 1959. I called Gay Talese, the famous writer, because he was a few years above Bernie, and he went to Alabama. I said, "What the hell is this?" He said, "My grades were terrible. Principal said I'd never go to college." But Alabama was under pressure to diversify, pressure from the federal government. And as long as they weren't black students, the doors were open. So they just took busloads of Italian kids and Jewish kids, no matter what their grades were. And Bernie actually was part of a fraternity there, Jewish fraternity, but he pined for Ruth and didn't finish. Here's an engagement announcement. She's wearing a new ring. It is not the same ring that went for auction for $550,000. That's at a bar mitzvah also that an employee gave to me. That's Ruth, bottom left. Peter, Bernie's brother, above his wife Marion. Peter went to prison for 10 years. That's Bernie. Life in Montauk, Mark, Andrew, Peter, and Bernie. Happy New Year. Lipstick building. From 1987 onwards, the Ponzi really got fueled here in the Lipstick building. The 18th and 19th floors were a legitimate broker-dealer operation, and the 17th floor, here's the 18th, 19th floor at one point in time, and here's the 17th floor desk. A Fed gave me that photo, and I was delighted. See all the action? The problem is that in the last 10 years of the fraud, records show that $800 million from the Ponzi scheme went to prop up the 18th and 19th floor operation, which was hemorrhaging. And the 18th, 19th floor was being run by Peter, Mark, and Andrew. Peter, a lawyer, well-educated. Mark, University of Michigan. Andrew, Wharton. Bernie never traded. Nobody ever saw Bernie trade, and the employees that I spoke with. He'd have lunch with his sons at the trading desk. He loved having sandwiches. Frank DePascali, he's the deputy in crime that I mentioned. Shauna. Shauna lives in Westport. She was the compliance counsel, and I learned that she was very close to being indicted. There were actually arguments at the U.S. Attorney's Office over it. She submitted and worked on false SEC filings. The question came down to whether she knew they were false, proving that. Her father instead is the chief of compliance, went to prison for 10 years. And Shauna, Shauna did what all compliance counsels in her situation probably need to do. She opened a yoga studio in Westport. I called her, and she was very sweet. She said, I've never spoken on the subject, and I won't, but if you want to talk about yoga, Bernie's boats, penthouse apartment. Bernie said, so I lived well, so what? It was never about the money. They always say that. It was never about the money. Here's Palm Beach, the Hamptons, Not bad. It was a media circus outside the courthouse for Bernie's appearances. Advice to Bernie that he didn't take outside his apartment building. And now he gets 150 years. He's at Butner. Is it loud enough? Yeah. Okay. I guess I'm not. Mark Madoff. Mark committed suicide on the exact day of the second anniversary of Bernie's arrest.
What will it take for you to forgive yourself? What have you?
No, I'll never. First of all, I'll never recover from losing my son Walk, which I've been responsible for.
It's a sensitive subject. I wasn't going to bring it up, but I'm sorry to hear that you feel responsible.
No, I mean, look, most people tell me I shouldn't, and the psychologists here tell me that I shouldn't. But I created a situation that it was very difficult for them to deal with. I mean, they believed in me. They believed, they looked at me as sons would, and then all of a sudden, they felt betrayed. And Walk had, I came in for media attention for the brutal incident. He couldn't walk out of the house without being tormented. And financially, he looked at me, he was going to be ruined. And I blame a lot of it on my son's attorneys. They, from day one, they wouldn't let Ruth be in touch with them whatsoever, even though my wife's attorneys and my attorneys thought they were being ridiculous. I mean, she wouldn't even understand it. Not wanting to talk to me, but she was not in the business, she was not charged with anything, she was not under investigation. I know he told friends, he told him in office. He had no support system.
Okay. Mark and family, Andrew, who died several years later of resurgence of cancer. Ruth, let's talk about Ruth not being in the business, not being under investigation. One of the rare interviews she did was on 60 Minutes, and she said, I was only in the business from 1961 to 1963, and then I left to raise the kids. I'd come in and pay some boat bills or house stuff, and that was it. I was just a bookkeeper those 2 years. It was not true. And in fact, the prosecutor told me that she was watching the show and said, I can't believe that Ruth is lying to 60 Minutes. The fact is that Ruth was in charge of reconciling the books of the Ponzi scheme, of the Chase 703 checking account. And all of the Ponzi money, almost all of it, went through the Chase checking account, Bernie's personal account, $100 billion in and out through the life of this thing. She's very good at math. Her father was an accountant and may have been ground zero in the scheme. I didn't prove that. So there's Ruth reconciling the Ponzi Chase books until early 2008. She didn't leave in 1963. She stopped doing it about 8 months before the entire thing exploded and Bernie was arrested. FBI agents told me they nicknamed her Ruthie Books, like a mob nickname. She also withdrew money in the end, which, of course, you're not supposed to do. When the music stops and someone's arrested, you're not supposed to take money out. So, as I said, everybody on the 18th and 19th floors, Mark, Andrew, Peter, knew that Bernie didn't trade. And Bernie would joke with me that he didn't even know how to turn on a computer. That was the joke around the company. And yet all of this major money was coming from the 17th floor Ponzi, which it was kind of like a conveyor belt, like a factory that manufactures rat poison, just churning out these documents over and over again on these obsolete computers that don't talk to the 18th and 19th floor, let alone stock exchanges. It's just sort of in a completely other world. And his 17th floor puppets are the ones who are taking care of this stuff and looking at what prices of stocks sold at on the Wall Street Journal every day, the day before, or on Bloomberg in later years. This is one of my favorite FBI documents. The head of the computer department at Madoff in 2005 printed out every email for a period of time for a select group of employees that included DePascali, Peter Madoff, Andrew Madoff, Mark, and Shauna. That's because the SEC had sent a request in 2005 for specific documents, including emails of the sons. Each employee was required to go through every email, segregate the, quote, problematic email, which was any that referenced customers or could trigger further inquiry by auditors. This was a shredding party. When asked about the level of knowledge Madoff's son, Andrew, had about what DePascali and his team were doing on the 17th floor, DePascali related several events indicative to him that Andrew knew exactly what was happening on the 17th floor. But I'm going to skip over that. It's in the book. Anybody know who this guy is? The celebrities that didn't do due diligence, poured money in, lost money, Larry King. I always forget their names. Yeah, all right. Zsa, Steven Spielberg, Lautenberg. It goes on and on. Betancourt of L'Oreal. The favored clients, the favored customers, the ones that Bernie really loved, he had a folder called the Stupp folder. And Stupp, which I think, can I say it in a sanctuary, is, plug in a good way. He's not Jewish, so he spelled it wrong. DePascali, the folder was B. Stupp, Schupt. All right. And these people at the end of December would get extra profits, even more so, sometimes 20% returns, 30, 40, 50%. This was Hanukkah geld. This was Christmas money. They were getting stupped. DePascali stupped these accounts every December since the mid-1990s. He placed the money in the accounts via manufactured option trades out of thin air, and everyone who received stuff knew it. Not a sane person in the world didn't know they were getting stupped. Okay, this guy didn't get pleasantly stupped. Ellie, my God, Ellie, the iconic spokesperson for the Nazi Holocaust. He survived Buchenwald and Auschwitz. Hadn't he suffered enough? Does Bernie know no boundaries at all but to take Ellie's money and wipe out his foundation? And I said to Bernie, how could you take his money? And he deflected the question, as he psychologically had to do. I've spoken to shrinks about that. He said, look, Elie Wiesel came in at the request of friends of mine who I've known forever. They put me under pressure to invest for him. Everyone put me under pressure. I did have dinner with him once. You can't even have a conversation with Elie. You can't hear what he's saying. He's full of shit, that guy. First of all, he didn't lose any principal like everyone claims. He's counting the profits. Elie did say when Bernie was arrested that we all thought he was God. I ran into Elie at a Jewish charity event before he died, and I said, do you ever heal from this sort of thing? And he said, no, but we've been through worse. Carmen, famous model, Carmen Delar Fichet, am I saying it right? I interviewed her, longest running model, I think, around. I said, Carmen, did you do due diligence when you lost everything? She said, no, if it's good enough for Ellie, it's good enough for me. I'm a seamstress. Ask me about making dresses and I'll tell you how to put that together. And I thought about that. I thought about what Carmen said. And it occurred to me that people do more diligence when they're buying a TV than when they decide who to give their money to. It's astounding. And I'm also an example of that. I figured I'm doing the book. FINRA has a broker check website for disciplinary actions. I said, well, I have an IRA. I better, go in there and see. I put in Hal's name for Merrill Lynch, and he was convicted of a felony in 1968. I said, why is he still doing it Merrill Lynch? And I called him. I said, what's going on? He explained how he helped his father-in-law. He's sorry he did it, blah, 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 blah. I stayed with Hal because I accepted his story, but had he run off with my money, I'd have only myself to blame. By the way, Donald Trump, in one of his books, said that Madoff tried to solicit him to invest while they were playing golf together, and that Trump turned him down. And then Trump later said that, he just spit out people's money. And I asked Bernie about it, and he said, he claimed he never invested with me, which is true. But when he said I approached him, which is not true, never for anything. I played golf with him once at his golf club. My brother was a member of it. And that's typical Trump, to say he was smart enough not to invest. And Bernie starts laughing. And I thought, can you imagine a golf matchup between two of the greatest fabulists around? And in this case, I did believe Bernie. Yeshiva University. Many of you already know the story. We can talk about it later, about how Yeshiva lost a lot of money, having Bernie on the board, deciding where to invest the money. And of course, he does it with himself, conflict of interest. International Olympic Committee, Jamie Dimon, Chase Bank. I have a chapter on Chase. Without Chase, there's no Bernie. Chase is the engine of the entire thing. And the amount of memos and emails that lay out who knew what when, there were no less than 12 Chase executives and employees I found who had red flags and ignored them. And nobody was indicted individually, but I did find the one who came the closest to being indicted, and I name him in the book, a compliance official. Now, it's not like the bank's corrupt, Jamie and they're sitting there thinking of Madoff, and it's not like that. It's the units are not talking to each other. Chase has as many employees as the population of St. Louis, 250,000. How do you communicate? It's an IT problem. You've got the compliance units not talking with the profit-making units. And so you had a situation, for example, where the private banking unit didn't let their people go into Bernie. They thought he was a fake. So, of course, when the fraud happened, they were doing a victory lap. Look, we knew. But the hybrids and exotics department, they're creating products based on Bernie. They're hiding under their desks after this thing goes. They're not talking to each other. This is terrific. This is a prospectus from UBS that went out to employees and executives. Look at the bottom. Don't ever enter a direct contact with Bernard Madoff. I didn't put this in blue. This is unbelievable. And the reason they can't is because Bernie will cut you off. He was kind of like the soup Nazi like that. No soup for you. You ask too many questions. Orthodox Sonia Cohen is a story unto herself as a major feeder from Austria, still battling, not wanting to return the money. That's a chart of her various shell companies around the world, which you can try to figure it out for me later if you want to take a copy home. The pick hours, the leading investors, customers that made money from the Ponzi scheme. He died of a heart attack a year afterwards. $7.2 billion civil settlement that Barbara agreed to. But she didn't want to give the money to people who lost. She wanted to decide which charities should get it, and the Fed said that's not happening. They let her keep about $1 billion for a new foundation. That's their spread. Annette Bongiorno, one of the Madoff Five, poor Annette, glorified secretary, convicted. She had $50 million when the thing came down. She had a palatial place in Manhasset. She drove a Bentley. She couldn't even see out of it. I liked her. I hung out with her a bit in the court. Look, Annette kept everything. She kept documents. Can you see on top here? This is one thing she wrote on one. Old sales, new buys, and fake sales. Wow. The jurors love that. I don't think I'm going to have time to talk about Freeling, the accountant, who rubber stamped everything out of an office next to a Chinese restaurant in Westchester. But he had blank letterhead that he was given to do anything he wanted to on Madoff property. And the same blank letterhead system was used by the promoter getting people into the Westport National Bank. Some of you may perhaps remember that. I can talk about it later if you want. Weston promoter, Silverman, who made a fortune working with the bank. The bank didn't have custody, even though they claimed, and they were sued, and the Attorney General went after them. Bad business, Westport National Bank. That's their old location. Madoff was a hoarder and a shredder. And he had a shoe fetish, sorry. The federal agent gave me that picture. Quite a lot of, the obsessive colors that these people, Roots ring, I went for $550,000. At auction, the bull. Now look at this, his life ring. You talk about how many red flags does an investor need. He's bringing people on the boat. The boat's called Bull, and the life ring's Bullship. Now, what happened? In case you missed that memo, behind his desk, he had a sculpture that was called The Soft Screw. Sculpture by Klaus, thank you. You, of course, with your art, you know it. I was staring at anybody who wanted to see it. And when you hear a particular excerpt of a conversation with Bernie at the end here, you'll understand his thinking a little bit on this. That's Ruth in recent years. Poor Ruth is in assisted living in Southport, and she suffers from dementia. And that's Peter Madoff, now living in West Palm Beach. He's out of prison, tugging around dog food. Okay. Yep.
Everybody, has very selective memory. Really, just only want to think about, what I did to them. Don't want to take any blame that they've really contributed to this. All of these people push themselves on me. I did everything I could, other than just say, listen, I'm committing a fraud, don't give me any money.
la-di-da-di-da. I've exceeded my 30, but I just want to say that I was once asked what takeaway that I have from him, the biggest takeaway from my time with him. And it occurred to me that he never asked me a single question about myself. And all these visits and years and phone calls, I didn't care, but it was fascinating. And I would throw little clues out, like, oh, you're from Laurelton. I grew up in Levittown, lower middle class, Jewish, but he could care less. He went on to the next thing. He couldn't hold me as a real full person, because if he did, he'd probably have to hold all the people who he took money from. So it's not personal, but he just can't hold me. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. Oh, thank you, Sean. Thank you so much, Rich. I know you could speak for 7 hours because the book
15 years,
is very
apparently.
rich. That wasn't a pun. I apologize. I want your permission to ask you a few Jewish questions before we turn it over to all of you. You may also have Jewish questions for Richard. First of all, it seems to me that there is a fascination within the Jewish community about Bernie Madoff. Is there a similar fascination beyond the Jewish community? Or is this, a bit of like, I don't know, is there something about Jewish identity, like American Jewish identity, that we American Jews are fascinated that one of our own could become this, do this, etc.? Is there a greater fascination in the Jewish community than there is beyond it?
Yeah, well, the fact that he's the biggest, longest, lengthiest fraud ever, of course, creates the interest globally, regardless of where he comes from. But it is true in the Jewish community, there. Historically, I've spoken with rabbis about this, and going back centuries in the Jewish community, there was always a big macha that everybody followed, that knew what to invest in, that they could trust. Jews could trust each other. And that's how they viewed Bernie here. Even when Bernie was arrested, my Aunt Adele said, there must be something going on. Trust me, Bernie's a mensch. Everything's fine. Somebody must have screwed him up. So it was devastating that he could do this to his own, which of course is an amazing psychological story in and of itself that you can delve into.
Right. So there are points at which you describe, especially even in the introduction, you describe this as an affinity crime.
Yes.
One could, on the one hand, say that aren't most crimes affinity crimes? You commit crimes against people you have like access to, or institutions that you have access to. So that's affinity. But a larger question is, is there such a thing as a Jewish crime? A crime committed by a Jew, is that necessarily a Jewish crime? A crime committed against Jews specifically, is that a Jewish crime? I'm asking you to just, theorize here. I think it's a fascinating question. You could ask the same question about books. What's a Jewish book? Is any book written by a Jew a Jewish book? Is any book written by non-Jews about Jews a Jewish book?
Is Philip Roth a Jewish author?
For sure,
yeah,
I would say, for sure. He's easy to answer. Like, there are plenty of others who are, Anyway, the question is there such a thing as Jewish crime? And if so, does this qualify?
That, I'm just... who I wish was sitting here with me? I interviewed Rabbi Aaron Levine before he died. I spent hours with him in Brooklyn, and he, of course, wrote the encyclopedias of Jewish crime and Jewish ethics, and my book took a different turn. But I would like to go back and review my interviews with him and see what he said on this subject. I raised these questions with a Rabbi Shiner of a Palm Beach conservative synagogue when I was in Palm Beach reporting on this. And he did say that this was on the one hand, devastating for the community down there. On the other hand, he said our zip code is one of the most charitable in the country. So you've got crime against Jews, and you've also got the fact that they give a lot. But it's tough. I can't.
Yeah.
You got me.
And here's my third and final question, or maybe it's a topic. I think I knew this prior, but I didn't fully realize it until you wrote about it. The leadership of the firm, of course, was all Jewish. Their last names were all Madoff, you know.
Yes.
But the 5 who went to prison are all working class Catholics. Those on the 17th floor, you're pointing to somebody. Oh,
I see Jim Filan laughing. Jim is an attorney in town who represented one of the 17th floor employees.
So
an amazing job. Who was Jewish, but
so there's something at the very least uncomfortable to me about this. That you know that there's something that makes me uncomfortable. That there was these well-to-do Jews hiring folks who perhaps they thought were beneath them to do the dirty work of the fraud.
That's very insightful, and I never actually even thought about that until you brought it up. But it makes me think about how they all came to be there. Frank DePiscali, as deputy in crime, lived next door to Annette Bongiorno and drove her father's laundry truck, and it was just a Bensonhurst or I forget where, in the Italian neighborhood. She gets a job as a secretary at the company and pulls him in and opens his eyes up, and he never leaves. And then you've got Jody Krupe, Annette Bongiorno. You're right. The computer guys.
The 2 programmers, O'Hara and...
Yeah.
So I don't know, I'm not sure that there's much to say about it, but to me it's a striking contrast and a striking aspect of this story.
It is, because those were the only 5 employees who went to prison. And they
besides Bernie and Peter.
Bernie and Peter. And, there were others who pled.
Correct.
But I think they were all Jews who pled.
So
right, the non-Jews decided to go all the way to trial. They thought they could win. The Jews pled.
So we have a microphone, and if you have questions for Rich, should we start on this side? Just ask you to use the microphone because, as I said, there's folks on the live stream who we want to be able to hear the questions as well as the responses.
Thank you very much. My question is about his sons.
Yeah.
So you kind of threw a little tidbit out there. I was wondering if you could give a few more concrete examples of how you think that they actually knew about it.
It's in the book. There are a couple that spring to mind. One of them is they would be handed their monthly statements at their trading desks of what their father had done for them in the investment advisory business. And the statements would sometimes say that he sold a particular stock that he had bought for them a month before, but he hadn't. It's not on that statement from a month before. So you've got a pattern of that, and these transactions seem to really benefit them at a time when they needed a particular amount of money for real estate purchases, for example. Suddenly they need $4 million, and look at that. I got $4 million. This is fantastic. It's amazing. There were secrets, but there weren't. Bernie would be at the trading desk with his sons. Frank DePiscali would come upstairs and say he's got a little problem with some of the statements, and Bernie would talk about it openly in front of the boys. He would say, well, go find out what the market did yesterday. And he would ask the boys to weigh in on it. I mean, those are just some examples, but there are others as well. They were on the road to being indicted, FBI agents told me when they died, the boys were. It's interesting, too, that they fought tooth and nail not to return the money, which is astounding.
Given the amount of research you've done, can you provide any insight as to why this Greek gentleman who worked on Wall Street for years complained and brought to the attention of the SEC and whatever would listen that Madoff could not have possibly generated the returns, yet apparently it fell on deaf ears? I'd be curious if you had any insight as to why that gentleman was so ignored for so many years.
Yeah, that's a long conversation and a good one. I have a whole chapter on the SEC, and I get into this. But just to sum up, you know, I exposed the lengthiest Ponzi scheme before Madoff back in the 90s. And the way that it was found was that the SEC received a fax from an investor saying, Bernie's supposed to give me this money back, and he hasn't. The fax was picked up, handed to an attorney, and he said, this is real. Within 2 days, the guy was behind bars. In 50 years, not one Madoff investor ever contacted law enforcement or the SEC. Not one. Harry Markopoulos is a pretty wacky guy. Slept with a gun under his bed, had all kinds of conspiracy theories about Madoff. If you look at the letters that he wrote, I actually sat down with the SEC attorney in this prior case I'm mentioning, and I say, let's sit down for a few hours. I want to go through Harry's letters. At what point are you going to open an investigation based on these letters? And I went right through it. How about now? No, no, no. You know, and there are a lot of reasons for it. But listen, the SEC took the rap, I think, way more than they should have. It's very easy to do Monday morning quarterbacking on these investigations. People needed to fall. Harry, by the way, well, he wanted to be paid. He was a competitor. He didn't have the meat. He didn't have the goods. And actually, a few years ago, he pulled a real stunt that I have in the book. He teamed up with some short sellers and did a report on how General Electric's going to vanish as a company. And the report was nonsense. It was exposed in Fortune, but he was going to profit a lot from that. So, look, he's a character. Should it have been found sooner? Sure. But one of the problems also was, very cleverly, the 18th and 19th floor actual sales and the fake sales for the Ponzi would have been very difficult to unravel at the Depository Trust Corporation at the time. But anyway, I'll have tomatoes thrown at me when I defend the SEC, which, look, they need so much more money, the SEC. You could triple that budget. And both Democrats and Republicans are responsible for defanging the SEC over the decades.
It was interesting listening to your phone conversations with Bernie, and especially talking about Mark's suicide. He didn't seem that sad or remorseful to me. Did he ever become human to you in that way? Were there...
No. You know, he talked the talk, especially when I was with him. I never saw a wet eye. I never... I asked him once, why didn't you cry in court? I had cried my eyes out already. I had no more to... but I don't think he's capable of having that gene or that part of the brain that actually really cares about other people. Although he knows how to sometimes say the words. But you can see he'll say, I'm so sorry, of course I'm remorseful, but then in this 2 sentences later, he'll start attacking his investors. Nobody writes to me. I don't have any letters. Strangers write to me. All these people, I made them rich, not one letter. He said, by the way, I just want to say, because I said earlier, Bernie, my first visit with him, I think it was, Bernie said, I read people, New York Magazine, am I a sociopath? He said, I hurt so many people. I hurt people I love, family, friends. Am I a sociopath? He said, I asked my shrink here in prison. I said, what did she say? She said, I'm not a sociopath. I said, oh, what did she say you are? And he said, I'm a compartmentalizer. Like the rest of the world. But I did submit some transcripts of my conversations with him to former FBI agents from the serial killer behavioral unit, like the show Mindhunter, and they analyzed them for me, and we talked a lot about that kind of a brain. Anyway.
I saw a documentary where apparently they attempted suicide in 2008. It was like a candy bowl filled with Ambien and Klonopin. And they were disappointed that they woke up the next day. Did he ever talk about that?
Yeah, he claimed it happened. I'm suspicious about it. This candy bowl, I think it was a reenactment, right? One of those fictional reenactments of.
But I just read that it.
Yeah, I don't think there's any proof that they did it, that they tried. It just isn't. And also, it'd be very hard to kill yourself on some of the things they tried to take.
That's right.
And yeah, well.
Saw another hand.
You're my friend. You can't ask me a question.
Well, Rich, thank you for this great presentation, and some of those photographs are really bringing it out as well. Like this was a real person that
Thank
did
you.
these evil things. I wanted to talk and get your input on the effort to recoup the funds from the feeders and the people that got stooped and give it back to the people that lost money.
Yeah.
Did they get it right? Did they, did the people that, how they define of who really knew, or the people that, or just your comments on that whole effort?
Yeah, no, that's complex. Actually, well, to his credit, the civil trustee Irving Picard and his team have so far gotten back about between 70 and 75% on the dollar to net losers. That's just what they put in. I mean, you're not talking about the fake stuff. The stuff people wanted to be paid, and they fought in court based on their final statement, which was insane. No, it went through courts. I mean, think about it. One of the judges said, if we did that, it would basically say everybody should run a Ponzi scheme because you're going to get all the fake profits back. But 75% have gotten their principal back. And it still continues. There's about 70 more cases that he has. This is going to go on for a long time. I was just at a crime conference and ran into one of Picard's guys, and he just said, "This is a career. I mean, it's just going to go on, and they're fascinating cases." Now, people think that just what Picard is getting is all, but there are actually like 4 different pots. There are several mini Picards around the world who are working, and they're not talking to Picard, and they don't communicate. And then, of course, we have the federal government with a federal fund that distributed $4 billion, and they don't really talk to Picard and vice versa either. There's a lot of turf battles. We'll never know exactly how much was lost, how much recovered, how many people, because there's just too much, people took and put in, they came in different other ways, and then there are a lot of people who didn't want to they have money overseas. They don't even want to call Picard's office because they're not paying taxes for years on things. So anyway, does that answer your question? It's whenever I have nothing to do, I just go on to Pacer and read about all the pending cases. It's really
You mentioned that the boys were complicit and knew what was going on. One of the most dramatic parts of the story is that the boys turned their father in. That was portrayed. Do you think that was staged and part of an agreement to make them look good?
Yeah, well, I know how the prosecutors and FBI view it. They do believe it was a ruse in order to make them look like the heroes and keep them out of harm's way. But I don't know. There's no proof of that. That's just how they feel. You know, did they know it was a Ponzi scheme? Did Ruth know it was a Ponzi scheme? It almost doesn't matter, because there was so much wrongdoing going on. There was so much criminal activity in that universe. And in terms of the word Ponzi, I mean, and then you get into the whole problem of conscious avoidance and willing blindness and all of these legal terms. But I don't know where I come down on whether it was a ruse. I probably lean that way, based on everything that I know about the family. Now,
In the book, that's how you certainly portray it.
yeah, I lean that way. And by the way, you know, think about certain things. I mean, Peter Madoff, supposedly Bernie confessed there's no more money and he's up in his office. Peter never once contacted law enforcement. He was busy figuring out who gets to the last $300 million. He was sitting there with Bernie and they had lists and color dots. And what about Marion? And Bernie said, Ruth's going to be fine. She has $60 million. What about Marion? And they're sort of tangling over that, which was pretty disgusting. The boys, Mark and Andrew, never cooperated, never helped law enforcement. They could have shaved 10 years off of these investigations, but they had too much to lose. Anyway, and give back the money. It's tainted money.
Right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I mean, really, this was...
Thank you.
I think it's fair to say that
He had
this...
the toughest questions. I'm not happy about that.
Well, I tried to come up with stuff that maybe other folks weren't going to ask, or maybe you know, like, because I think about the world from a particular
No, it's
perspective.
terrific. You're setting me back to now do more research. 'Cause
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Fair to say that this is not just a case, but a saga that is going to fascinate all of us who lived through it for the rest of our lives. So thank you for allowing us to explore some of the fascinating aspects of this saga. We have a whole bunch of books. So I'll invite us to let Richard go out to the table out back. If you want to buy a book, ask a question personally there, ask him to sign it.
Yeah.
He's happy to do that.
They're just $20 plus $1 or $2 in tax. So
There you go.
Amazon price.
And thank you to Stephanie Schwartz, our Director of Member Engagement and Programs. And thank you to Sean, who helps us live stream everything. Thank you to all of you for coming this evening. Take care.
Thank you.